9 centuries ago, the tropical lowlands of Southeast Asia, a suffocating expanse of monsoon-drenched forest, malarial wetlands, and laterite mud stretching from the Tonle Sap Lake to the sandstone ridges of the Kulen Mountains, were already in the business of annihilating human settlement. Empires that preceded the Khmer tried to anchor themselves in this terrain and were consumed. The Funan Kingdom built coastal trading posts on stilts, and the monsoon floods dissolved them into sediment. Chenla princes erected wooden palaces in the highlands, and the termites, the humidity, and the encroaching jungle reduced them to rot within a generation. Archaeological surveys have unearthed the remains of dozens of abandoned settlements across the Cambodian plain, foundations cracked by root systems, reservoirs choked with silt, irrigation channels erased by seasonal floods so violent they rearranged the topography itself. For thousands of years, the message was carved into every failed foundation and every overgrown ruin. This land does not permit permanence. It consumes, recycles, and erases. Logic, experience, and the accumulated wreckage of every previous attempt at civilization in this region all converge on a single rational verdict. Do not build here, not at scale, not in stone. The monsoon alone dumps over 50 inches of rain annually, transforming the lowland plain into a seasonal lake. The dry months that follow are equally punishing. 5 months of relentless, crackling heat that shrinks the water table, splits exposed stone, and turns fertile soil into hardpan. The geology offers no bedrock foundation, only soft, alluvial clay that shifts and subsides under any significant weight. The cost of imposing a permanent city on this landscape, in labor, in stone, in the systematic rearrangement of an entire watershed, would be so astronomical that no civilization possessing basic arithmetic should have even entertained the idea. But in the 9th century, a succession of Khmer god kings, intoxicated by a theology that declared them living incarnations of Hindu deities, decided they would not simply occupy this landscape. They would terraform it. They would reshape the hydrology of an entire river basin, quarry a mountain range into submission, and drag millions of tons of sandstone across 40 kilometers of hostile terrain, all of it accomplished with nothing but human muscle, domesticated elephants, and an organizational machinery so ruthlessly efficient it would rival the logistics of a modern military invasion. The arrogance was not political, it was cosmic. They believed they were building the earthly mirror of Mount Meru, the center of the Hindu universe. They believed they were commanding gods into stone. This is the story of how the Khmer Empire declared war on the most hostile, tropical environment in Asia, mobilized an estimated 300,000 workers, carved 5 million tons of sandstone from the flanks of a sacred mountain, and erected Angkor, the largest pre-industrial city on Earth, a hydraulic mega-civilization spanning over 1,000 square kilometers, discovering across the centuries that when you cage a monsoon, the monsoon always finds its way out. Before a single stone was cut, the Angkor Plain was a landscape designed to reject permanent human habitation. Imagine a flat, featureless alluvial basin stretching to the horizon in every direction, broken only by the dark smear of the Tonle Sap floodplain to the south and the low forested ridgeline of the Kulen Mountains to the northeast. The soil is saturated laterite clay, a reddish, iron-rich mud that behaves like a geological trap, swelling when wet, cracking when dry, and offering no stable foundation for anything heavier than a wooden hut. From May to October, the southwest monsoon deluges the region with such ferocity that the Tonle Sap Lake quadruples in size, swallowing entire forests and transforming the lowlands into an inland sea. From November to April, the rains vanish completely, the rivers shrink, the clay hardens into a concrete-like crust that cracks and buckles, and the landscape transforms from flood zone to desert in a matter of weeks. This was not a site chosen for its hospitality. It was chosen despite its absolute hostility, because the Khmer kings understood that controlling this water, bending these monsoons to their will, was the key to feeding an empire. The desperation driving this construction was existential and theological simultaneously. The Khmer Empire, at its height, controlled vast stretches of mainland Southeast Asia, but the empire's survival hinged on a single, brutal agricultural equation. Wet rice cultivation requires precise, year-round water control. Too much water, the paddies drown. Too little, the crops wither. The monsoon delivered water in catastrophic, unmanageable surges for half the year, and then withdrew it completely for the other half. Without a mechanism to capture, store, and redistribute this water on a continental scale, the empire could not feed its population, could not raise armies, could not maintain the religious apparatus that legitimized royal authority. Every Khmer king understood the equation with existential clarity: control the water or lose the throne. The weapon they designed to fight this war was not a single structure. It was an entirely manufactured landscape, a hydraulic machine the size of a modern metropolitan area. The engineering centered on the berets, colossal artificial reservoirs constructed not by digging into the earth, but by raising enormous earthen embankments above the surrounding plain and filling the enclosed basins with captured monsoon runoff. The West Beret, the largest of these structures, stretches 8 kilometers long by 2.1 kilometers wide, covering a surface area of 16 square kilometers and holding an estimated 53 million cubic meters of water. That is enough water to fill over 21,000 Olympic swimming pools, stored behind nothing but walls of compacted earth, sculpted by hand. The East Beret measures 7.5 kilometers by 1.8 kilometers, adding another 37 million cubic meters of capacity. Connecting these titanic reservoirs was a labyrinth of canals, moats, diversion channels, and spillways that stretched across hundreds of square kilometers, routing the Siem Reap River, capturing mountain runoff, and redistributing it with a precision that modern hydrologists describe as astonishing. This was not irrigation. This was the systematic rewiring of an entire watershed. The scale of material and labor defies any framework built for the pre-industrial world. Angkor Wat alone, just one temple within the greater urban network, consumed an estimated 5 to 10 million blocks of sandstone, quarried from the slopes of Mount Kulin over 40 kilometers away. Individual blocks weighed up to 1.5 tons. There was no wheel. There were no pulleys of industrial scale. There was no iron. The blocks were extracted using fire and water fracturing, heating the rock face with controlled burns and then dousing it with cold water to exploit thermal shot cracking, then shaped with iron-tipped chisels and dragged on wooden sledges to canal networks where they were loaded onto bamboo rafts and floated downstream during the monsoon floods. 300,000 workers and as many as 6,000 elephants were deployed simultaneously across the construction zones. The blocks were assembled without mortar, ground against each other with wet sand abrasives until the surfaces achieved joints so tight that a knife blade cannot penetrate them 9 centuries later. The entire temple of Angkor Wat was erected in approximately 37 years under King Suryavarman II. Every stone arrived by muscle and river. Every wall rose by ramp and lever. No crane, no winch, no engine. The initial triumph was intoxicating beyond rational measure. By the 12th century, the Angkor urban complex had exploded into the largest city on the face of the planet, a sprawling, low-density metropolis covering over 1,000 square kilometers, home to an estimated 700,000 to 1 million inhabitants at its peak. That is larger than modern-day Los Angeles by geographic footprint. The berets gleamed like artificial oceans. The canals hummed with traffic. The rice paddies fed by the hydraulic network produced surplus harvests that funded standing armies, monumental temple construction, and an administrative bureaucracy spanning thousands of miles. Jayavarman VII, the empire's most prolific builder king, erected Angkor Thom, an entirely new walled capital city within the greater urban area, along with the enigmatic Basin Temple, 102 hospitals, 121 rest houses along imperial highways, and an expanded canal network that pushed the hydraulic system to its absolute operational limit. It was a civilization running on engineered water, and for 2 centuries, the machine worked flawlessly. Then the climate turned, and the machine began to eat itself. Tree ring data analyzed by researchers from Columbia University's Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory reveals that beginning in the 14th century, the Angkor region was struck by a series of prolonged, multi-decadal mega-droughts, the worst the region had experienced in centuries, punctuated by episodes of catastrophically intense monsoon flooding. The hydraulic system, designed for a more predictable monsoon cycle, could not absorb these extremes. When the droughts came, the berries drained below operational levels and the rice paddies withered. When the floods came, they arrived with such violence that they overwhelmed the canal network, eroding embankments in some sections while choking others with massive sediment deposits. Computer modeling by the Greater Angkor project has demonstrated that the system was so tightly interconnected that the failure of even one major canal or embankment triggered cascading breakdowns across the entire network, a catastrophic domino effect of siltation, erosion, and structural collapse. Simultaneously, the empire was bleeding from external wounds. The Ayutthaya Kingdom, a rising Siamese power to the west, launched repeated military incursions, culminating in the devastating sack of Angkor in 1431. But the real killer was not the Siamese army, it was the water. The hydraulic system that had fed 1 million people and legitimized divine kingship was collapsing under forces no earthen embankment could withstand. The population dispersed. The canals silted over. The jungle, patient and relentless, began its 6th century campaign to swallow the city whole. Jump to the present. Angkor is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the most visited archaeological complex in Southeast Asia, drawing over 2.5 million tourists annually before the pandemic. The world sees postcard temples glowing in golden light, but the invisible war between the jungle and the stone has never stopped, and the jungle is winning. At Ta Prohm, the so-called Tomb Raider temple, silk cotton trees and strangler figs have driven their root system so deeply into the masonry that the trees and the temple are now structurally inseparable. Remove the roots, and the walls collapse. Leave them, and the roots continue to pry the stones apart, millimeter by millimeter, year by year. Bat colonies roosting in the temple towers generate tons of guano that mixes with monsoon moisture to create acidic compounds that actively dissolve the sandstone carvings, erasing 9 centuries of artistic heritage at the molecular level. The groundwater table, destabilized by deforestation and modern development around Siem Reap, shifts unpredictably beneath the temples, causing subsidence and microfractures in foundations that were never designed for a landscape stripped of its original forest cover. Tourism itself has become a corrosive force, millions of feet grinding ancient stone staircases into powder, hands polishing carved apsara dancers smooth, vibrations from tour buses cracking foundations. The Apsara National Authority, supported by UNESCO and international teams from Japan, France, India, and the United States, wages a permanent, exhausting, enormously expensive campaign of structural stabilization, drainage management, root control, and stone restoration, fighting on dozens of fronts simultaneously against an environment that has been dismantling the city for 600 years and shows no intention of stopping. The paradox is devastating and ancient. To the tourist photographing Angkor Wat at dawn, it is a timeless monument, permanent, serene, triumphant, the crown jewel of human achievement before the age of machines. But to the conservation engineer measuring the rate of sandstone dissolution, to the hydrologist tracing the ghost outline of a beret that once held 53 million cubic meters of water and now holds nothing but scrubland, to the archaeologist excavating the shattered remnants of a canal that once fed 1 million people, Angkor is something far more complicated, a colossal wound carved into a living landscape by 300,000 pairs of hands, slowly being sutured shut by the same monsoons and the same jungle that those hands once defied. Ancient engineering on this scale was never mastery. It was the most audacious form of borrowing ever attempted, a civilization-sized loan taken from the Earth's own hydrology, repaid with constant maintenance, constant labor, and the understanding that the moment the payments stopped, the jungle would foreclose. They quarried a mountain, they rewired a watershed. They built the largest city on the pre-industrial planet using nothing but stone, water, muscle, and elephants. And for 200 years, the monsoon complied. Then it changed its mind, and the greatest hydraulic civilization in human history drained away like water from a cracked beret. Because sometimes hidden beneath the roots that are slowly strangling the most beautiful ruins on Earth, beneath the silted canals and the collapsed embankments and the empty reservoirs that once held artificial oceans, there is a quiet, ancient, unfinished negotiation. A negotiation between the human compulsion to impose order on a landscape that was never designed to accept it, the monsoon's indifferent insistence on returning to its original course, and the 300,000 anonymous laborers, the muscle, the sweat, the broken bodies, who carried 5 million tons of stone across 40 kilometers of hostile terrain without a single machine to build a city that the jungle has been patiently, methodically, tenderly consuming ever since,